Welcome back to the Possibility Perspective. If you are someone living with any kind of chronic illness or chronic pain, or if you live with somebody, or you have somebody in your life, a friend, a family member who is living with one of these conditions, you're going to want to tune in because I've got somebody here who's going to talk to us about it and really help us understand the perspective of the person dealing with it, and then also how we can be a support system in that. And so today my guest is Meagan Harold, and she is the Tenacious Wellness Coach. And she is not coaching from theory. She's coaching from lived experience, and which is why I'm really excited to have her here today. And so we're going to start out and just have her share a little bit about her journey, her story, and her why. And so Meagan, thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here and to share with you and your listeners. I'm Meagan, like Jessica said, and I'm the founder of Tenacious Wellness Coaching. And what I do at Tenacious Wellness is I coach folks with autoimmune conditions or other chronic illness so that they can learn to live a life of meaning and purpose and optimal health in the midst of all the challenges that chronic illness brings. So how did I get here? It's a long weaving story. We won't get into all of it. But essentially, from a young age, I was really drawn to mental health. Because of my own mental health challenges, I became hypersensitive to the challenges of others and really felt this pull to be of service. So as I got older, I was going into college and I was really torn into what I wanted to do. I wanted to either support people with mental health issues, so going into psychology, or I wanted to work more towards supporting the earth and working in the natural field. And so I actually ended up doing that. I majored in geology. But even as I was going down that path, I never stopped feeling this pull to support other people with their mental health. So as life went on, my career in geology wasn't really aligning with what I saw, what I wanted my life to be. So I had a career change when I moved from Minnesota to the Seattle area. I worked in administrative services, which was a good fit for me and my personality, but I still felt like I wasn't really fulfilling my purpose. So in 2017, I was also diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and that's an autoimmune condition that impacts your joints. Your immune system essentially thinks that your joints are dangerous to your body, so your immune system attacks your joints. It's a very complex and it's a really hard condition to understand unless you have it, but it can affect your life in a lot of ways. So I was 24 when I was diagnosed. I didn't really know anyone personally who was going through something similar. So it was really isolating and I felt really misunderstood and alone. And I realized at that point that there just isn't a lot of support for people like me who get a chronic illness that changes how their life looks from here, changes their body and their capacity. So as life continued on, I was working through this diagnosis, continuing to feel that pull to support other people. When the pandemic hit, as many of us I know likely experienced when we had so much time to ourselves to think and ponder and evaluate, I really felt like, okay, if there's a time, it's now. So I decided to do a certification program for mental health coaching and apply that to supporting other people like me with chronic illness that don't want it to keep them from living their best life.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for doing that and following your heart and your passion, because that's where I think the greatest service is when we really follow those pulls. And fortunately, unfortunately, you were given, your own physical situation that also kind of, really put you in that position of like, okay, I really want to help people now with this because I'm living it. Um, do you Do you, I don't know if I have to relate to or use this term at all, but I've heard like anything with like a chronic illness of any kind is like a lot of times called an invisible illness because a lot of times there's nothing that, like to the naked eye that you see is quote wrong with anyone. And so oftentimes there's just like that heaviness or pressure is because people just don't know. Is that, can you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Chronic illness, it can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it can be really visible. Like for instance, with my condition, I go through periods of time where I have a lot of symptoms. So you might see me limping or not like really being able to move an arm or something like that. So then it's really obvious. But other times my symptoms are a little softer, so you don't have that visibility. But what a lot of people don't realize is that even in times when the symptoms aren't really obvious, they're not very problematic, when you have a chronic illness, you are still doing a ton of internal and external work to keep yourself going and to keep yourself functional. You have all kinds of doctor's appointments to keep, medications to keep up with. You have to be hyper vigilant about a lot of the health practices that the average person should do, but when you have chronic illness, it's 10 times more important that you keep on it. So you're essentially being a caregiver for yourself. And I think that a lot of people just don't see that work that you have to do to just go through an average day.
I can say I can't imagine because I don't have a chronic illness, and sometimes days still feel hard to do the basic things. Like if you're stressed or you're busy or you're doing these things, like literally sometimes basic necessities for life feel hard to do. And I can get away with, quote, skipping them sometimes, right? And that's a luxury that you take for granted if you don't know any other way of living.
100%. That was something I learned early on, and I learned the hard way a lot because at first I didn't want to admit that I needed to change how I did things, change my routines, respect my capacity and how that was ever changing and shifting. You really don't have a choice if you're going to not burn out and your body break down. So yeah, you're constantly evaluating, and you do with time, it does get easier because you're more able to understand what your limits are. You're able to notice when your body is kind of whispering like, hey, we need to shift this or that. We need to ease back a little bit. So you're right. It is incredibly hard, but it does get easier the more you learn about yourself and are really honest with yourself. That doesn't mean that your life is going to probably look the same as it did before. Your routines are going to be different. The way you show up in life might be different, but that's better than not showing up at all.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go further, just for clarity's sake of people watching or listening to this, can you list out like when we're lumping things into this word of chronic illness, like what are the things that you would probably categorize under that?
That's a great question. So, what I categorize as chronic illness to define it are conditions that aren't necessarily terminal. They just have a large impact on your body and your day-to-day life, but they're not curable. There's really no end date for them. So that includes basically everything in the autoimmune area, things like rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, psoriatic arthritis, lupus. Those are all great examples of chronic illness. In chronic illness, there's also things like diabetes, heart disease, epilepsy. So things that aren't inherently terminal, but very impactful.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you for clarifying that because I feel like there may be people listening to this being like, is this that? And also, by the way, if you're listening to this and you have questions or, there's something you think you might want help with, we'll make sure ways to connect with Meagan are all in the show notes and all of that after this as well. And so when you're working with people, do you normally see people like across the board or is it like newly diagnosed or like been kind of diagnosed and now really struggling or is it kind of all of the above?
It's really all of the above. It's very common when you're recently diagnosed to just be completely lost. Having that support right away is super helpful. But at the same time, chronic illness is a lifelong journey. So you're going to have highs and lows. You're going to need times when you need extra support because maybe your symptoms have just been really bad, or you're just feeling really weighed down. You've had a big life change. There can be all kinds of reasons when you need to get extra support, start really focusing in on different health areas so you can be better supported. And so it really just across the board.
Do you think, well, how do I ask this question? Because with anything in life, you're going to run into obstacles. And that's where like our beliefs, our mindset are so integral and important for how we navigate that situation. And so, would you talk on that a little bit around like kind of the mindset of like, because you kind of alluded to this too, where you had in your own journey, like, okay, I had to really shift and, change my mindset around myself and my body as a priority, right? Talk to
Mhm.
me about beliefs and mindset in this specific arena.
That's a great question. And I think one of the most powerful things that you can learn when you have chronic illness is to shift your mindset, because it's going to be a tool that you'll use over and over again. So one of the really impactful mindsets that I've had to work on is to not. I don't. I don't look at success based on what I'm able to accomplish with my body. I look at more, was I able to do as much as I could within my current capacity? So you really have to change how you weigh things. For example, I've been very active for most of my life. I love to be active and would love to run and do intense activities like that. But when I got my diagnosis, that became harder and harder. So when you're really active, it's really, you're really common to be like, hey, I ran 5 miles today. Like, that's amazing. But there was no way that I was going to be able to run a single mile for points of time. So instead of beating myself up about that, I would instead look at what is in my capacity right now. And maybe I can push myself a little bit, but I can't go beyond the capacity I know I have. And that takes trial and error. But yeah, so that's one of the big things that I've learned is to really honor your capacity and cheer yourself on when you are able to stay in that capacity and maybe push yourself a little bit, but not too far. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That
Yeah.
that is a complete shift in being able to celebrate little wins. It's like I want to use the term self-love in that too. Like you gotta really, and I imagine that's its own set of work to do is, your way of being, your way of life, physically, mentally, like everything has changed. And so you gotta like reprogram loving yourself as you are yourself now.
Mhm.
Yeah?
100%. And as it shifts, because chronic illness changes. So it's something you have to relearn all the time is as your body changes, as your capacity changes, how do I honor that? How do I love myself just as it is with whatever's happening?
How do you communicate your own needs, boundaries with your loved ones, your friends? Like, how does that work?
Great question. It's honestly a continuing conversation that I have. And it's not a conversation that I have with every single one of my friends and family members. It's just the ones that I have learned over time are willing and have the capacity to provide the support that I need. So my partner provides the most direct support with me. So he and I, it's just like a continuing conversation. If we go through, if I'm going through a hard time, I will learn from that, like what I really need for support. He'll learn what he's able to give more. So we come together and talk about it. And I'll share with him, this is what helped. This what didn't help. This is what I really would like. And then I ask him, is that something you can provide, or do we need to look elsewhere for that kind of support? So it's really just about continuous open communication and making sure that you can be honest with each other and to say no when you really just can't. Because what I have learned is that I'm really afraid of becoming a burden. And so if I know that the people that I have in my support system are willing to tell me, no, I can't take this on, I will feel less worried about being a burden because I know that they won't let me become one to them
Sure.
because they are open up with me about their capacity.
Yeah, that's something you said there. I mean, open, honest, clear communication and boundaries and setting that. And I imagine that's probably something you then work with your clients on too, because that's got to be like a huge part of this living day to day is the people in your life. And maybe, like, kind of, you mentioned some discernment, even of,
Mhm.
right place and time of, and so flipping that then to the other side, to the partner, you know, advice, thoughts on, like, it's maybe probably echoing the same advice, but not being like too it up in your grill or too overbearing or like overprotective, or because that's my tendency. So, and I'm
Yeah.
speaking from my experience with a husband who has type 1 diabetes.
Mhm.
I have learned and am learning to shut up sometimes because I'm like, that thing beeped again. Are you okay? Do you need to go get a thing? And just shut up because sometimes he just needs to be left alone. So, thoughts or, anything on that, people like me, the spouse or the friend of somebody.
Yes. Kudos to you for learning that maybe you need to back off a little bit sometimes because I can totally relate to your husband. Sometimes we want to deal with it ourselves and we just want to be trusted that we're going to deal with it ourselves. And yeah, but it's great that you've learned that. There's really three areas of advice that I like to give people who are supporting someone with chronic illness. And these are all things that I even have to work on because they're really, really hard. It's not intuitive to support someone with chronic illness because we're used to helping people with short-term crisis level things like an injury, a surgery, a job loss, stuff like that, where we know that there's going to be an end date. Chronic illness is lifelong, and that is incredibly daunting to think about how you can support someone with that. So, the first thing I like to talk about is shifting the mindset from, like I said, short term to long term. A lot of times people will come in really strong with a lot of energy and they want to do a whole bunch of things, but they can't keep that up realistically. Like they're not going to be able to just continuously reach out, make meals, do that kind of stuff. So it's important to take a step back and really think as someone who's of support, what is something or some things I can do long term that are within my capacity, because it's more important that I am there for the long haul versus just a little bit and then I have to disappear because I can't keep up. So
Mm,
that area is really important. And then the next area is really, really hard. And I struggle with it too. And that is to try not to give advice. And it's very natural for us to want to do that because we want to fix it. When
mhm.
someone we care about is sharing that they're in pain, that they're suffering, we want to fix it. So we want to give them all kinds of tools to do that. But the thing is, when you have a chronic illness, you are dealing with doctors and other care practitioners. You're probably doing your own research and you have all of these shoulds, all these things you should be doing in our head all the time. You can't do them all because you'll go crazy and it becomes very, very overwhelming. So we're constantly thinking, we're constantly sifting through the shoulds, trying to figure out what we can do, what's in our capacity as far as energy, finances, time. And we're working through them as much as we can in the midst of everything that we're dealing with. So when we share with excuse me, a friend or a loved one that we're struggling with something, what we want is you to actually just be our witness to what we're dealing with. We want to be understood, we want to be heard, and we want to be affirmed in the midst of what we're going through. And I know that, like I said, I even have trouble with this and I know better. It's really hard, but the more that you can practice just being a witness to what your loved one is experiencing, that is really, really helpful. And then the last thing is kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, having that communication, is just really believe your loved one when they tell you what they need and what they want and what's in their capacity. And make sure that they know that they can be open and honest with you, because they are the subject matter expert when it comes to what they need. So yeah.
That's so true. I'll raise my hand. Yes, I've been guilty of all of those things. And though it's helpful and also really hearing you say it, and again, I think this comes back to creating safe space to have open, honest, maybe even hard communication with the people in your lives and the people around you, to create that space, to create the space to just be there. And so couple follow-up questions just so I like make sure I understand this and I'm better. So questions like, how can I support you? Right? Like those are kind of like, I'm not offering, like because the answer might be, you can't right now. And then you have to then on the other end of that be like, okay, I'm here if you need me.
Yeah, exactly. That is a great question that is super important. And yes, affirming that that's fine. I'm here whenever you need me. And when I say don't give advice, I don't mean what you can do, because of course there are going to be times when we come across what we think is a gem and like something that's really going to help someone. You can ask them if you can share it with them. It's not like never give advice. It's just maybe ask first, see if they're open to it. And if they are, great. If they're not, that's fine. Just tuck it away for later. Maybe ask again. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like real life scenario, like I just come across this like really great article on something. And so I'd be like, Meagan, I just found this really cool article. Is it something you'd be interested in?
Yep, exactly. That's all I have to do.
Leave it at that. Like I don't have to bombard you and be like, Meagan, did you know that?
Exactly. Because then you're just like,
Thank you and go away.
Yes. And I also like to remind myself and my clients, when your loved ones do that, just remember it's coming from a good place. So if you have to kind of come back to them and communicate with them, like, this isn't really helping, just do it from a place of love and grace, because they really do mean well. But yeah.
It's so true. And I'll just say that I think my biggest takeaway from this is that I think sometimes, also you get into a space of where you may be kind of walking on eggshells because you're afraid to do or say or ask. But I feel like my takeaway from this is that's going back to that, like, you gotta then ask the stupid question or do the thing to get yourself into the space of knowing and being, and then, working together and working through whatever it is. But if you're walking on eggshells, then there's some communication that maybe isn't happening.
100%. Yes, walking on eggshells is not helpful either. It's really easy. I mean, of course, it's very understandable to worry about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. But I think a lot of times it's better to say or do the wrong thing instead of doing nothing at all. And then learning from those times when maybe you do the wrong thing or you say the wrong thing. And then, excuse me, another piece of advice that I have for people who are caring for a loved one with chronic illness is to learn as much as you can about that particular illness. So, I mean, of course, every person's experience with it is different, but try not to rely on the person you're caring for to explain to you what the illness is and how it works. And when you have that knowledge, you might be a little bit more empowered to think of concrete ways that you can help. I mean, don't just do them, ask, but it is helpful as someone with chronic illness. Like I love when people ask, hey, what can I do for you? And I also love when they ask me, can I do X, Y, and Z? And I can tell that they have thought through that these might be things that are helpful. Because especially in times when I'm in flare and I just am overwhelmed, it's hard to think of what I need. So having those specific options is helpful when I can, especially when I know I can say no to all of them, that isn't helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say thank you for being such a resource for people, because I've come across a lot of coaches in the 14, 15 years of doing this work, and I've come across a lot of people, and I've never, I mean, it's rare, it's more rare to come across somebody who's really working through the mental, the relational, the challenges that come with having a condition. Because like even like my experience with my husband, like there's all sorts of this out there and a lot of advice around like diabetes of what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat and what you should do to exercise and blah, blah, blah. But I feel like there was definitely a lacking in the support of like just adjusting mentally to the fact that your life is different now.
Yep. 100%. That was the gap of care that really became apparent to me when I got my diagnosis. You get your diagnosis, you get your medication, and then they send you on your way. And I was like, wait a minute. My life, my body are all different. What the heck am I supposed to do? And yeah, that's what inspired me to do the work that I do, because it's so needed, because chronic illness does not need to keep you from living a life of meaning and purpose. It just is. You have to sort of change what that might look like and change your expectations for yourself.
What didn't we cover that you want people to know or think about or take away from this episode? Or even a point we've already covered that you really want to drive home and make sure people, if they were going to take away one thing from this?
I guess if there's one thing to take away from this is that chronic illness requires you to embrace uncertainty with openness and to really take it on without. The more you can learn to deal with uncertainty and to accept it as a part of life, regardless if you have chronic illness or not, the easier the journey will be.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your journey, your wisdom, and giving me advice along with all the other people watching and listening to this. And how do people contact you if they are interested to know more?
Great question. A great place to start is my website, which is tenaciouswellnesscoach.com. You can also email me at Meagan, spelled Meagan, at tenaciouswellnesscoach.com. And I'm also on Instagram at tenaciousmeagan.
Thank you so much. And everybody, I'll have all of that information in the show notes wherever you're getting this episode. So thank you again for being here. And I wish you wellness, prosperity, joy, and all good things ahead. Hey, before you go, make sure you've subscribed to the podcast wherever you're getting it and leave a comment and let me know that you were here. I really appreciate that. If this resonated with you, share it because it will probably help someone else. And the more people we can reach, the better. So thanks again for being here, and I'll see you next time.